Welcome to the 50 Shades of Greatness Lounge.
What? We're back again.
We're here.
Okay, so listen, man, I got to ask you a question.
Yes.
And I want your opinion on it.
I would love to give you my opinion.
Okay, so one of the major tournaments for the sport of tennis is the French Open. It's just about to begin next week.
Okay.
One of the major female tennis players in the world is Naomi Osaka.
Okay.
She is actually quite a pleasant young woman out of Japan, and she is formerly ranked number 1. I think she's ranked number 2 right now.
Okay.
Now, here's the issue at hand. As we all know, sports figures rely on the media presence to cover sports.
Yes.
And they are famous because of media journalism.
Correct.
Okay. Now, in tennis, it's a little bit different than other sports because they're more contractors and they're not assigned to a franchise.
Okay.
For example,
right.
They are all basically contract workers to the WTA if you're a woman, or to the ATP if you're a man.
Okay.
And why is that important for this context? Well, it's important because as contract workers, they are very dependent upon their media presence because they're not getting a salary from a franchise, such as the Buffalo Bills or the New England Patriots in the NFL.
Right.
Okay. So
there's a direct correlation, exposure to revenue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Very direct. And in tennis in particular, the pyramid is very pointed at the top. In other words, you have to be in the top 20 or so to make a very good living in tennis. And if you're in that top 1% of all tennis players, then you're doing very well.
Okay.
But in other sports like the NHL or the NFL, you're going to have thousands of players that are in those leagues that are all making a very good salary.
Right.
It's not the same for tennis.
Okay.
If you're in the top 1,000 in tennis, you're not making any money. In fact, you're going to be losing money. Only the top very few will make any money.
I'm getting educated. I don't know tennis very well.
So I want to give you the whole situation because
it
reflects, I think, on society at large in this current generation of people.
Okay.
The question I'm asking you is this. The French Open is one of their biggest tournaments, one of the 4 Grand Slams. It's like golf in that sense. There's 4 Grand Slam tournaments. Gotcha. And everybody wants to win those Grand Slams because they're the biggest prize money and it's the most exposure for endorsements and such. Naomi Osaka, like other tennis players who, even if they're number 1 or number 2 or number 3 in the world, they make more money from their endorsements and their exposure, right?
Yes.
Their sponsorship deals than through the actual career winnings themselves.
Yep. Makes sense.
So she made $55 million last year.
Okay.
She trailed only a handful of other sports figures in the entire world. LeBron James, Roger Federer in tennis, and I think maybe Messi or Ronaldo in soccer. Mm-hmm. Now, $55 million is nothing to sneeze at. Like I said, the vast majority of that was gained from her endorsements and sponsorship deals. Mm-hmm. But she went into the French Open and said, I refuse to do any press conferences during the French Open. And she cited mental health as her reasoning, that she felt that the questions being asked of players weren't always nice and were sometimes hurtful because they have to do press conferences win or lose. And she felt that mental health was being damaged by some of the journalism and the questions being asked, obviously, of losing players.
Right.
So she wasn't making a statement for all tennis players. Don't misunderstand me. This was for her own personal opinion. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that we're seeing more of that. I mean, through other sports too. Kyrie Irving coming out in the NBA and saying that he's questioning the questions that are being asked of him, saying that it's just certainly not relevant or important to today's society. And he cited some mental health issues himself, saying that I'm not going to answer these questions. I think that in this particular situation, but the difference with Kyrie is that he is also answerable to his team and then the league, like I said. But here in her case, she is only answerable to the governing body. What did you call it? The WTA?
WTA, yeah. And so because she announced that she wasn't going to do any media press conferences, she's automatically being fined.
Okay, that was my question. So she's going to be fined by the WTA.
That's right.
Okay.
And she's willing to pay the fines. Okay. She's not complaining about paying the fines or anything like that. She's saying she realizes she's going to be paying the fines and she's going to do so without complaint.
I think it's her right. I mean, I think it's her right to do so. She is a tennis player. She doesn't necessarily have to be a particular personality. She can be who she wants to be, and she can prove herself on the tennis court. That may not be appealing to some people, but particularly in this sport, like you say, she's only answerable to herself and then the WTA, which she's willing to accept the fine. Now, the person who's going to pay the highest price in regards to her not doing the interviews is herself. So she's, cutting off her nose to spite her face
A little bit.
in this particular situation. However, if she deems that worth it, then by all means, proceed.
Okay, so I have two competing opinions on this.
Okay.
On one side, listen, the issue of mental health is extremely important, particularly now during the era of COVID.
You bet.
People are cooped up. They're experiencing
It's
different
a
levels of
tough time.
solitude, financial
Strange
hardship,
days.
whatever it may be. But I feel like this particular citing of mental health, because she particularly tied it to the idea of these media questions after losing a match.
Okay.
I felt that was a little bit misplaced because we just talked about for a brief moment how serious mental health is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that her citing of that particular tie that she's making between they're just asking her a few questions after she lost a match, right?
Right.
I think kind of belittles people who are going through serious mental health challenges to be asked some questions for 20 minutes because you lost a tennis match. Yeah, you could be annoyed. And some of the questions you might find particularly hurtful, but I've watched a lot of those press conferences, and I think it's overstating the case to think that it's really going to be damaging to your mental health. Listen, tennis players have been answering these questions. You're the first one to not answer them. And none of them have ever stated that the press junkets have destroyed their mental health. There's a lot of other more serious issues that you can deal with just in life than answering some questions from journalists after you played a game. And number two, remember that her fame and her fortune are a direct result of that journalistic coverage.
Yes.
If the tennis players didn't get media coverage, they wouldn't have any exposure. And if they didn't have any exposure, why would any corporation give them sponsorship deals? So there is some sort of debt being owed to the media coverage. The other side, though, of me says, well, she can do what she wants. She's her own person. She's a contractor. So who am I to tell her that that's not the way to go? So I think I don't want to tell her you can't do that, because who am I to say that, right? But I do think there is some criticism to be had when the generation, it feels like sometimes this generation of people, because she's only in her 20s, right? She's very young. She's still developing. Mm-hmm. And you always want to cut some people some slack. And I understand there's a lot of pressure in being famous, but it is something that she signed up for as well, of her own volition. She knew what would be entailed. She's a very smart young lady. Mm-hmm. So she knew what was going to be entailed as the whole picture, the whole spectrum of responsibilities that would be foisted upon her for being a very successful tennis player. Right. She didn't come into this unaware.
Yeah, but she might not have been doing this to become famous.
No, she wasn't. But she knew that to make the fortune that she was going to make in tennis, she would have to be a very successful tennis player, and that fortune and fame would necessarily follow because of said success on the court.
Right.
And she would make far more money with her sponsorship deals and media exposure, right, than she would with the actual career winnings.
Okay. So this is what I would say. I would say, okay, first of all, what would this person, why did she pick a sport, an individual sport rather than that of a team?
I don't want to get into that psychology.
No, but what I'm saying is maybe she's a loner.
Maybe
she's a natural loner.
Or maybe she's just good at tennis. Maybe she just likes it.
Right. Maybe she's an introvert.
There's a lot of players that would have played team sports. There's a lot of great tennis players that said, well, I was going to play soccer, but I just ended up playing tennis.
Right.
So I don't know about that.
Yeah. So, but I do also agree with you in do you owe the sport?
A little bit.
Owe to promote the sport. This is the thing that's elevating your status, to have this living, to have this thing. And I think in most cases, most athletes feel the need to pay that sport back, right? To promote it, because it's given so much to them, right?
I think it's a great point.
So I think there is an onus generally for most to do so. Are there going to be some cases where some people have a problem with answering these questions? And let's face it, the press often asks the stupidest questions. And they're also trying to get the next big quip. They're trying to really poke the bear to try and get someone to say something offside. I would say that that's pretty safe to say. Make it now in tennis might not be so much. I'm a basketball.
No, you said it well, because they do sometimes ask stupid questions,
right?
And they could be idiot. But as you pointed out, tennis is an individual sport. It requires a certain amount of mental toughness to win any big individual sport,
yes.
Especially at a major.
Which, for sure. It's just you out there. It's and
just you.
The world.
Which Naomi Osaka has already done on several. She's already won a few of the majors.
So clearly she's mentally strong.
Okay. Come on. Like, I just don't think it's putting forward your best foot when you're citing mental health, when there are people out there who really have struggling with serious issues that I think are more pressing than answering 20 minutes of questions after playing a tennis match. Especially if someone who's already shown moral fortitude to actually win major championships and who owes her living to the media exposure that those questions provide.
But hence, due to her success, she is now in the driver's seat.
Yes. So there's the other side of the equation. That's, well, she's actually quite a pleasant young woman. She's very intelligent. And if she doesn't want to answer questions and she's not complaining about paying the fines, then God bless her.
Now, if I were her, I'd go McEnroe. I'd go McEnroe on everybody. I just let it fly. Like
what, hit.
No, just let it fly. Say what you want. Don't care. Just go out there and let her go.
Well, couldn't you just?
I mean, McEnroe just let and hey, man, that guy was a little bit out of sorts from time to time.
Yeah, and he's now actually very well respected.
Absolutely,
he does a great job.
100%, and great personality. So if I were her and I wasn't pleased, I'd let him know. Like, let him know.
There you go.
Let it fly.
Why couldn't you? If somebody asks a stupid, why not just do the press conferences? And when somebody asks a stupid question, because it's going to be inevitable, you're a strong young lady. Say, that question is so dumb.
Which would be a great response. Maybe she doesn't understand that she can do that.
I think she does. She's like I said, she's an intelligent young lady. Why not just find a middle ground? Say, that I'm not answering that question. That's ridiculous. And within reason, right? You don't want to shut down every question.
Yeah.
And then just give the journalist an opportunity to ask something else that's a little bit more relevant and maybe not so clearly trying to get a clickbait question.
Yeah, she needs to go back and look at some interviews from McEnroe and Bobby Knight.
Andy Roddick was
so Bobby Knight, and treat the media as such.
I don't think Naomi Osaka is going to try to model herself after either one of those.
I would love to see it.
She is a very different personality.
But I think in the end, we don't know what another person's experience is.
That's
right?
True. Yeah.
So despite the fame, despite the fortune, all of that, her being in front of a group of people grilling her might be too much. And I think that those type of athletes are harder on themselves, particularly those in solo sports, than anybody else. It's just them against the world, and they probably beat themselves up.
There's nobody else to blame.
That's right. And so maybe she does that too much, and taking it from somebody else would be maybe just too much for her to bear.
Yeah, one thing one thing you just made me realize is that, it might take mental toughness to win the match, but it's a whole host of different emotions coursing through your veins when you've lost the match.
Absolutely.
And then people are asking you.
And at that level, how tough could she possibly be on herself?
She could be, I think she is extremely tough on herself. I think she's something of a perfectionist from what I can gather.
Yeah. And again, the person who loses most in this scenario for her not speaking is herself.
Yeah.
Cutting off her nose to spite her face, reducing her own income. So she wants to take the fines and lose that income for lack of exposure, then I guess so be it. So that shows that there might be some credibility to her claims of saying, listen, this is a little bit too much on me mentally. And like you said, she's an intelligent woman.
Yeah.
But and then the other side is, yes, does she owe something to the game? Yes. Well, but mental health is the most important thing.
My concern is that starts some sort of precedent where it might bleed over into other sports where they just say, nah, I've got enough money. I'm not answering any of your questions. Hit the bricks, pal.
I think that genie's already out of the bottle. We're seeing that.
Do you think it's very commonplace?
Well, Kyrie Irving, man, he's doing that now.
I mean, I'd like to see journalists up their game so that they don't ask stupid.
I think that is the biggest thing. I think
ask the athletes proper questions.
Well, go do some research. Ask something that's interesting and different. And these athletes are getting sick. These athletes have honed their bodies all their lives, have been dedicated to these particular sports, masters at their crafts. And I think you get these journalists in there who are not doing the same level of dedication to their job as these athletes are in theirs. And I think they just get sick of it.
I think if I was a journalist and I was asking players questions, you could always have the fault if you said, well, it's always hard to come up with intelligent questions. Like, is it really?
It's the job.
Why not just simply ask if failing anything else, why not simply ask about the specific tactics that athlete employed for that particular match or game? Yeah. Because that's always an intelligent question. And I don't think any athlete would mind giving that a specific response to the tactics they had to employ for that particular match or game, because it's always different.
Here's a particular treat. I'm going to go really off.
All right.
Have you heard of Nardwuar before?
No.
Okay. Nardwuar is a entertainment journalist. Look him up. I believe he is Canadian, and he does research to the end. So when he goes and interviews musicians, he actually tells them things about them that they didn't know about themselves, and then presents them gifts from their past. Their minds are blown. So do yourself a favor, YouTube Nardwuar, and you'll be like, this is a guy who does his research, and it's incredibly entertaining.
Okay.
And plus he wears a funny outfit and all that, but it's just unbelievable. This is what journalists should do. And then you're going to get the attention of these athletes.
Well, they could certainly not all journalists would have the talent of this Nardwuar, though, but they could at least make an attempt to ask more specific.
There it is.
Interesting. Do a little more work. Okay. So where I come out on that is it's a nuanced view of it. I do have some criticisms of her, but again, she's quite an excellent young lady from everything that I can tell, right?
Yeah.
And I think she can. She's the captain of her own vessel. Let her make her decisions.
You bet. I think a key thing that's greatly lost on a lot of things these days is nuance. So it is a nuanced conversation. We all need more nuance.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to ask you. I don't like to be too extreme on any particular issue unless the solution is so clear. Then I will become.
Yeah. And mental health, in the end, we really have to really be subject to the person who's projecting the problem. And again, she's only hurting herself.
Yeah, and I don't want to, like, my criticisms of her is not my assessment of her mental health, right? We have to. So
totally.
If somebody's citing her own personal mental health as an issue for answering these questions, then maybe I should zip my own.
No, it's a good conversation. That's okay. We
but
look at it
at least
with
ask
empathy.
The question. Look at that with empathy. And go, wait a minute.
She's a public figure. We're sitting here talking about it.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. So we're getting a greater understanding of the overall situation. So that's not a problem. Well, she's a public figure. We can discuss it. I think it helps everyone to have a overall. I think talking about mental health is always a good thing. I don't think you lose going about discussing mental health and talking about the ramifications of that and how it can affect people.
And it's good that when public figures bring it up more and more as a topic of everyday conversation, because so long it's been shunned, and so many people suffer varying levels of mental health. And somebody who you might think is the most stable mentality that you've ever met might go through a bout of anxiety that it could be temporary, it could be lasting. We don't know, because mental health is invisible.
Take a look at Kevin Love from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Played with LeBron, won a couple of or maybe just one in Cleveland with him. Anyway, he's been touted as he's come out and really talked about mental health a lot.
Okay.
And a lot of players really admire him for doing that. And I think it's fantastic too. I think, it just allows the public to say, hey, look at this person who's someone that they honor, someone who's an incredible athlete, that you think this person doesn't have a problem in the world. And clearly that they're sharing some issues that they have. And it allows other people to then have the permission to do the same. And I think that's a great thing. So, maybe this might be the same thing on the tennis level in a way.
Yeah,
but
it sounds analogous to me.
Yeah.
So
Good conversation, man. Nuance.
Okay, here we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, remember, no matter how nuanced we get, we are just going to ask you to do a couple of things. And the first is to keep your stick on the ice.
And the other is to keep your balls in the air.
Peace out. We love you.